Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about textile arts, quilts for charity, and how to promote species and ecosystem preservation using images to convey messages through art. With my guest, Luana Rubin. She is president, founder, and co-owner of eQuilter.com. She has worked in the fashion industry in Los Angeles, Hong Kong, and New York, and has received many honors and awards, including the President's Volunteer Service Award, the Michael Kyle Award from Quilt Industry, the Top 20 Quilt Industry Leaders of 2023. And she is active with many different organizations and charities and has been interviewed and profiled in many quilt magazines around the world. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here with you, Nancy. Thank you.
I very much enjoyed hearing your presentation where you showed pictures of your quilts. And yet, even though this is radio, you could describe those quilts, but you're doing more than just creating beautiful images of animals and the earth. You are giving the quilts to many different charities. In fact, you have raised over $2 million since 1999 and given 20,000 comfort quilts to groups all over the world, whether or not it's in Central America, Asia, Africa, Europe. Why have you focused on quilts?
When I came from the garment industry and sort of stumbled my way onto the quilt industry, I knew that I had found a home. The garment industry can be rather backstabbing and cutthroat, as you may have heard, and I was really interested in the pure expression of art and design and color, and I love drawing and painting, but I really also love sewing. So when I discovered quilting and all the beautiful, wonderful, generous, compassionate people in the quilting world, I said, wow, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Indeed, those people are so compassionate that you have worked with other quilters and given quilts to people in need after disasters from hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, mass shootings, famine, extreme poverty, cancer, hospice. It must be hard to decide who to give them to because you've worked with so many charities, Doctors Without Borders, Engineers Without Borders, Mission of Love, the Wild Foundation, Ocean Conservancy, National Breast Cancer Foundation, and so many more, including the Endangered Species Coalition, Earthworks, Carter Center. Do they approach you, or do you approach them and say, you have a quilt, where should we give it?
Often it starts with our customers approaching us after a disaster. So I'll give an example. One of the biggest projects we ever did was after the tsunami and earthquake in Japan. We had an outpouring of love and concern from our customers wanting to help, and I said, man, if you guys want to send quilts, we will get them over to Japan. And we have mostly worked with our partner, Mission of Love. And so if Kathy Price at Mission of Love says she's game, we start collecting quilts. They're either shipped directly to Kathy's warehouse in Youngstown, Ohio, or they come here and then we bundle them and ship them on. It's just amazing how over time it can become hundreds and sometimes thousands of quilts. And Kathy arranged to have them shipped over there and then found an Army chaplain who is trusted. I mean, really having a distribution source that is trusted is key. And that's why so many quilters know that they can trust and they want to work with us. We'll get boxes from guilds that have 40 or 50 quilts when we have a group of recipients who really touch their hearts.
Since you have donated over 20,000 quilts, you haven't made them all. How many quilters are there in the United States? How many quilting organizations? Because you had to acquire them to be able to donate them.
Right. Well, they flow to us. When we put out a call to the quilting world that we're going to be organizing one of these projects, we just start getting boxes. And also, if I'm working with Mission of Love, they start getting hundreds or thousands of boxes that pour in from individuals and guilds. So So if I had to contact all of them, that would be a lot of work. But our customers put the message out, and then the guilds generally respond.
Teamwork definitely is important.
Mm-hmm.
You started being exposed to poverty in Asia in your 20s. I traveled the world when I was in college and saw poverty for the first time. You visited shanty towns in Hong Kong, Philippines, Brazil, Guatemala, South Africa. I saw them in many of those countries as well as other places in India and Asia. When you see that, you see a tremendous need both to help the people and to help protect their environment, because if we don't protect their environment, the people can't obtain the food and the resources to survive well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you focus on just the people, the need for health and educational resources, or also the communities to protect their local environment and be able to have sustainable farming and other resources available?
The big parallel story on that topic is making sure that factories that I work with are not polluting the local community. So a lot of people complain, I'm only going to buy made in USA. But the reality is, oh gosh, Nancy, I have so many stories about this because I worked in hundreds of factories in Asia. We are quite often working with women who have no other source of income to feed their children. I had experiences of women coming to me in factories and taking my hands with tears and just saying, thank you for coming here and bringing this work to our factory, because otherwise we couldn't feed our children. But I would also visit factories, and you can tell, if it's a clean factory and the people look healthy and happy, that's different than going to a place that's filthy and dark and people just look so downtrodden and depressed and sick. And I would choose factories to place production in based on that, because we wanted to support the factories and really encourage the owners of the factories to continue to be very conscious about their workers and the environment.
It is definitely a global world. We depend on resources from around the world. And as you say, while there's been a movement to say made in the USA, we have to consider the fact that other people in the world need jobs, need work, and they need to have healthy work environments. Even here in the United States, we have been known in Los Angeles to have what they call sweatshops and very poor working conditions. It is important that these people be provided decent work environments so that they have a decent living environment so that they can feed their families. You have definitely seen it and are trying to help in many, many different ways through getting the fashion industry to be more sustainable, but also through your work with the quilts. I have collected from many of my friends material that are remnants that people who sew end up with leftover material. And instead of putting it in the rag heap or the trash, I've given it to quilters to make quilts who have given it to the homeless here in the United States.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's important that we repurpose our leftovers.
Absolutely.
How do you decide what material to use in your quilts? Is it always new material? Is it remnants? Is it organic, non-organic?
Of course, quilters have many options, including all of those things. So my business is selling quilters cotton, and it's new. And, of course, the customer has the option to buy more or less. Quilters often have a stash, so they have fabric that they've purchased over the years or the decades that they've gotten from garage sales, that they've gotten from their mother or their grandmother, that they've cut up a wedding dress and they're going to make something out of that. I would say that there's more interest in organic fabrics now because it is a higher price. There was a lot of resistance to it. We've carried it for years, and it wasn't always our best seller. But I would say the new customer is more educated and cares more about this because they're young mothers who are making clothes for their young children or quilts for their new babies. And there is a big difference between organic and non-organic cotton fabric. The quilter's cotton is a particular weight and weave. It's similar to what you might think of as a blouse weight, right? Think of a cotton blouse or shirt, and that very strict 60 by 60 weave or 64 by sometimes 70 by 70, the quilter knows what to expect, so they're basically buying artwork on fabric when they purchase it over the internet. I would say the most exciting thing in terms of sustainability is that the whole industry is moving to digital printing. Screen printing historically has been very polluting to the local community. So if they didn't spend a lot of money to filter the dyes and the chemicals and so on, that would go right back into the wastewater, into the community. Digital printing, on the other hand, is very focused and precise. There isn't wastewater that's flushing out into the community. So I've been very excited about the digital technology that is more than half of the products that we carry now, and we expect it to be 80 to 90% of our products within the next 3 to 5 years.
I just met a lady who was collecting the remnants from upholstery and making pillows out of that material. So it seems as though wherever there's manufactured products, there's leftovers that need to be repurposed into other purposes.
Right. Well, that's the beginning of quilting, right? Back in the old days, as they say, when you finished making a dress, let's say in the 1800s in the western or even the eastern United States, you would save those scraps. Or when you had a dress that was too ripped up and worn to wear anymore, you would cut it up and make it into a quilt. The quilters back then were very thrifty. So some of them, and I would say more on the East Coast, those who had more money, I guess the best way to put it, might buy new fabrics. But if you were out on the prairie in a cabin, heading west and so on, all the way to California, for the gold rush, the women at that time, they would have to save every little scrap of fabric from everything, and then that would eventually be made into a quilt.
I have certainly enjoyed my hand-me-down heirloom quilts for my bedspreads and my blankets. They're beautiful to look at and wonderful. And in fact, I just took some of my many T-shirts from my running races and other events and environmental programs and activities, and had my seamstress make a new bedspread quilt.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
There's definitely ways to reuse, but I want you to talk about one of the quilts that you definitely are most proud of, and as an activist artist, your quilt called Rocky Mountain Poison. It was in the United Nations in Geneva in an environmentally themed exhibit called Water is Life, and it's been seen by over 150,000 people in dozens of exhibits, and has been acquired by the International Quilt Museum and has raised over $4,000 for earthworks. So describe the quilt, and where is this museum where one can see it?
Yes, well, I'll answer that part first. It's in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's the largest collection of quilts, both old and new, and I really recommend that you check it out if you're a quilter fan. The inspiration for this piece was I had friends living in Durango at the time of the Gold King mine spill, and you may recall there were pictures, and really it was all over the news, not just in the U.S., but even I saw it in the U.K. and European news. The river turned orange. There was so much toxic crap like arsenic and even radioactive nuclides that came out into the water, turned the river orange, and by the time it flowed through Durango, it was just bright orange, and they had to shut off the water supply and get their water from somewhere else. And I had friends who were living there who were scientists and doctors, and they started calling me because they knew that I was interested in making a piece about this event. And they said, we're doing independent testing on the water, and the levels are so high and it's not matching up to what is being reported to the public. And that really caught my ear because I've gotten involved with some issues like this before. There are some red flags, like when you see that there is potentially a cover-up, it's time to pay attention and shine a light on the people who are trying to get the truth out to the community. During the months afterwards, they started reporting to me that there was a rash of cancer cases, and of course you can only imagine what happened to the wildlife that was living in the river or drinking from the river. And so several months later, I was invited to visit the Jemez Pueblo, Navajo Pueblo, near northwest or west of Albuquerque. I met one of the grandmothers of the community, and again, she came to me and took my hands with tears in her eyes, and she said, you have to tell the story of what's happening here. Our groundwater has been polluted, and now the river has been polluted, and we have a rash of cancer deaths of parents who are in their 30s and 40s, and the grandparents are having to take over raising their grandchildren because of all these cancer deaths. And she said, like, every week we have somebody who's diagnosed or has died. So when I made that piece, I was receiving very specific information from scientists about what they were finding in the water. And, of course, you can look this up online if you're interested in seeing the close-up. But my idea was that you see this artwork from a distance. You see this beautiful mountain range with snowy peaks and blue sky, and you're attracted to come closer and look. And you come closer and you see this image of the mine with the orange water flowing out, flowing into the blue, clean river, turning the river sort of oily and orange. And then in the river, I put skulls. I stitched in the names of the various toxins and heavy metals and poisons. And then I also stitched in the names of the communities downstream that were affected by this spill. And of course, the Colorado River eventually goes all the way to the coast of California. So it's not just the folks who are in Durango, but it's that water that heads all the way downstream through so many communities and reservations, and finally is supposedly used by agriculture and, of course, citizens in California. Numbers anywhere from 20 to 40 million people were exposed to these toxins from this one mine spill.
How did the Rocky Mountain Poison Quilt raise money for Earthworks?
Yes, well, Earthworks had helped me and my daughter in her school during this period of time where the kids were unknowingly being poisoned in the school. So because of that, I wanted to do something for them. And I actually agreed to donate that quilt to be auctioned off to raise money for Earthworks. And after I had made that commitment, the museum approached me and said, we would like to acquire the quilt. And I thought, oh my gosh, we've got to come up with some way to make everybody happy here. So what we came up with was an online fundraiser for Earthworks, and it raised $4,000, and then they donated the quilt to the museum. So everybody got what they wanted, and I was absolutely delighted by that.
Such an important story, and we are going to talk more about art and activism with my quilter, Luana Rubin, when we return in a moment.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Luana Rubin, who is president and founder of equilter.com. You have been describing one of your quilts. You have made dozens of different quilts. You talked about poisons in the Rocky Mountain waters, but you also have done the polar bear quilt about environmental toxic exposure, which is now traveling in the endangered species exhibit. And you actually take people up to Churchill, Canada, where the polar bears come through the town. How difficult or easy is it to make a quilt of an animal?
Well, I think you have to start with a good image. In my case, I was able to take the photograph myself. Somebody else might use an image that somebody else took, another photographer, and get permission to use the image. Actually, one of the most fascinating and fun aspects of the work that I do, transferring a photograph to a line drawing, blowing it up, putting it on a piece of white muslin, putting that on top of a light box, and then beginning to kind of do a jigsaw puzzle of kind of a fabric collage to create the image. Yeah, I mean, I guess for some people they might be intimidated by that, but that's the part that I love the most.
How do you decide which endangered species to make a quilt about? Because there are literally thousands going extinct every year.
That's right. Well, maybe someday I can go back to being a full-time artist and I can make more of those. That's my hope. But the last one that I made was at the request of the Endangered Species Coalition for a show on endangered pollinators. And actually, I welcome that because, as you said, there are so many endangered species. There are obvious ones, like the polar bear is an obvious one, but the one that I made for this show was not obvious. I never could have come up with it on my own, but I was thrilled when they made the suggestion, and I looked at reference photos and I said, yeah, I can do this. It really inspired me to think about this species, this little butterfly, in a way that I wouldn't have. For me, with the polar bear, it was traveling up there. I've been up there 6 times over, at this point, 11 or 12 years, and every time I went, I could see that I was actually documenting the decline of the polar bear population in that area, and I was very disturbed by that. And I had this one photo of a bear just looking right at the camera. It was actually from the very first trip I took, and that was a trip where I just saw tons of bears up close. I got lots of great photos, and the bear, I just felt like that bear looked right through me. I mean, we had major, long eye contact. I'll never forget that moment, and that kind of moment that kind of wakes you up like, this is a sentient being. This is not a pile of fur running around that somebody's going to try to shoot and mount. I feel like I had a connection with the soul of that animal, and I was really compelled to make a portrait of that animal, but also to tell a story by weaving in the toxins that are found in the carcasses of dead bears. I have met friends who are researchers there who have told me that the story is not really being told, that probably the genetic damage that's being caused by the toxins they're finding in the flesh of the bears will probably destroy the bears before climate change does, which is really sad, which is why they're finding only one or occasionally two cubs with mothers each year as opposed to the 2 or 3 cubs that they used to see previously.
We're definitely seeing changes. When you choose an animal, do you want to take your own picture in the wild or take somebody else's picture? You have obviously seen bears in the wild. Wolves are very hard to see. I'm a cat person. I see bobcats, but I would love to see a mountain lion in the wild, but they stay away from human beings seeing them.
Yes, I have a great answer for that. Here in Colorado, we have an organization called the Wild Animal Sanctuary. They rescue carnivores from crazy people who think they can get a tiger cub and keep it in their garage. There are states where this kind of thing is still legal. And they actually have gone overseas and they've rescued large numbers of animals from zoos from South America to Europe. I know that recently they have been getting involved with a zoo in Puerto Rico. I believe they've gotten involved with rescuing animals from the war in Ukraine as well. So Pat Craig has become a friend over the years. I helped them come up with an idea for a fundraiser that raised about $100,000 in one night, and I'm really excited and proud that we were able to work together on that. Of course, they did most of the work, but I was the idea person. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that they have all of these carnivores, these beautiful animals who've been rescued, and if I want to make an art quilt about one of these animals that they have that I don't have a photo of, I just asked Pat if I could go through some of their images and pick one out. And I actually did that. I made one of a bobcat for the National Parks exhibit, and I did the Arches National Park, and the animal I chose was the bobcat, and that is actually in a book. Most of my pieces end up in books, and there was a companion book for the National Parks exhibit that includes my Bobcat Arches National Park piece.
I was just at the Orangutan Republic Foundation's awards gala, and they're trying to save the orangutans in Indonesia, and they had a silent auction of many different beautiful items. It must be difficult for you to determine what quilts to give away to organizations, to give away to people, which organizations should receive your beautiful artwork for their fundraising purposes, and which ones you sell to make a living.
Yeah, I haven't really sold any of my quilts. Most of them are still traveling. There's the one piece that has been acquired by the museum, but most of my pieces just end up traveling, and that's great for me because I want my message to reach as many people as possible. The butterfly quilt that I made for this exhibit here in Boulder recently, I got a message from a curator at the New England Quilt Museum last week, and she said, wow, I'd love to have that piece hanging in the show that we just put up. Can you send it out right away? So I did, and it was hung last week, and now it's sharing that message with people at that museum. So that's kind of how I like it to go.
There have been so many organizations that are recipients of your quilts. Do they continue to work with other quilters to carry on providing quilts, or do the quilters reach out to new organizations? What is the relationship between quilters and these nonprofits?
The quilts that have gone to nonprofits are really traveling with museums and exhibits as opposed to being acquired. Over time, I expect they will all be acquired. For instance, my portrait of Rosalind Carter is hanging at the Carter Center in Atlanta. America. That's what I hope my work will do in the long run. But the ones that are traveling in exhibits and going to museums, which are obviously nonprofits, that just thrills me because quilters see this work and they know that they can do the same thing. They can put an image or an opinion or an emotion about a topic into a quilt and they can touch the viewer's heart.
I'd like to quote something that you have said in your presentations, and that is, the arts are a powerful vehicle for activists to share their message in a way that is inviting and thought-provoking. In a world where many of us feel frustrated and powerless about being able to make change, art is a way to reach the viewer where they are at, to open the door and offer hope. You have certainly offered a lot of hope with your images, the images that you encourage others to make, and what you are doing with your quilts. It is possible, isn't it, to be an artist and an activist?
Absolutely. That's really my passion now, is to share that idea with artists and activists and nonprofits, because we can create a partnership that will reach out to people wherever they are. They may be on board, they may be kind of iffy about the topic, they may think that climate change is a hoax, but if you show them that image and they read the artist statement, and they may go home and think about it and think, maybe I need to give this some more consideration. I especially want to encourage artists to know that they do have a voice and that their voice has power and that they can reach out to others through their artwork and say things that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable saying directly, verbally.
There are over 110 million refugees. I think the figure is probably bigger than that, without a voice, without power. And the refugees occur whether or not it's because of war, because of environmental damage to their homeland, because of economics. There's so many different reasons. You have provided quilts to Ukrainian refugees in Poland, to the Japanese earthquake tsunami survivors, to help people in Guatemala who need lip surgery, and even quilts here in California for the California fires or the Tennessee fires all over. And you really started your activism because your daughter was poisoned in her middle school?
Yeah, it was pretty awful. I was invited to a private meeting of teachers and parents, and I sat and listened as they went around the room and told stories. And by the time they got to me, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I just thought, wow, this is huge. I need to get involved. And everybody there knew that something was wrong, but they just didn't know what to do. So I called on some of my nonprofit partners, and they referred me to some scientists and activists who came in and did some testing and advised us on what kind of testing to do on the kids. And basically at the end of it all, we discovered a particular blood test that needed to be done. It was an expensive test.
So often a personal experience gets a person engaged in an activity, whether or not it affects your family or you're affected by what you're seeing on the news. And there are ways that people can get involved. Anyone, I assume, can make a quilt, and it probably doesn't really matter if you don't sew very well.
Yeah. There are folks who are making activist quilts that are basically fabric collages, and sometimes they have a partner who is then stitching it down for them. Even children through the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which is based in the Bay Area. This is something that they're doing with students, particularly students of color, students living in low-income situations, helping them to express some of the social justice issues that these kids are having to grow up with.
I certainly wish that we had some visuals associated with the radio to be able to see the beautiful work that you have created and that you support other people creating, but they can go to a website and see the art and the quilts?
Yes, if they come to my business, equilter.com, and sign up for the newsletter, there are always links to my photo pages on Flickr, to my video pages, and of course I have several talks and appearances on Quilting Arts TV on PBS, including one on art and activism. And I'll also just say, if you want to go straight for the images, go to Flickr.com and search for my name, name, LuanaRubin. Go to the album page, and I have about 15,000 images of quilts and our activism projects.
I've seen some, but I'll have to go and see many more because it is beautiful work. Thank you so very much for caring about people and the planet. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Nancy.
I have been speaking with Luana Rubin, who is president, founder, and co-owner of eQuilter.com. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.